Welcome to Pensions for Millennials. I'm Michael Houghton from the Irish Fire podcast. Millennials are typically defined as people born between 1981 to 1996. 2021 is an important year, as we now have millennials that are turning 40 years of age. Millennials tend to get a lot of flack from the press. We're often considered entitled and lazy. Recent studies have shown that this is grossly false. And in fact, millennials are typically hardworking and face a much harder road than previous generations. In fact, some studies suggest that millennials will be the first generation to have it harder than the previous. With rising house prices, near zero and even negative interest rates, a climate crisis, and so many other challenges, millennials have it tough. With all that, it is possible for us to plan for our long-term future as well. This is what Killian Liston, Bellani Henderson, and myself are here to discuss. Bellani was kind enough to take the role of question master, and so without further ado, let's head over to the presentation.
Hi, my name is Bellani from MoneyCube, and I'm here to talk to Michael Houghton and Killian about pensions for millennials. So we're going to start today's session with what does a pension mean to you? Killian, maybe you could answer that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bellani. I started my pension originally in my 20s, and I think it meant a hell of a lot different then to what it means right now. So for me, when I started it, it was something I suppose I joined as I was influenced by older colleagues, and it was probably a means of avoiding tax, the higher rate of tax, or for tax-free growth. But you know, when life changes and you get to your 30s and you get a little bit older, I think it means different things like security or peace of mind or having a cushion and a long-term plan. So it's a very different meaning, as I say, right now. And you know, when the kids arrive, you do start to think longer term. So in 18 or 20 years time, when they've become adults, it's I suppose you're thinking about what you're going to be and what you're going to do, and giving yourself some options in the future. So for me, it's those combinations of that tax-free money, that employer match, that tax-free growth. So for me, for pensions right now, is what it means is win-win-win, and that's how I look at it, and that's why I am a big advocate of getting a pension.
Great. Michael, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would be very similar to Killian, actually. So it was actually my father that mentioned to me initially, I think it's similar age to you, Killian, in my 20s, that look, do you want to get onto this? And initially I saw it actually as a bit of an expense. You know, I saw it coming out each month and thought, oh, that's money I'm losing and giving up. And it wasn't actually until I got older, like Killian himself, and started to realize, hang on, this isn't an expense at all. This is an asset that I'm generating here, and I can start to see it growing in the long run. So it's become something now which I look back on as something that gives me great security, knowing that I'm going to have a great retirement one day. But also I know that every day that I'm adding money, or every month I'm adding money to that pension, that I'm creating a better future for myself as well. So really that's become the incentive from that point of view. And I certainly don't see it as an expense now, but as a great way to save and a very tax efficient way to save.
Yeah, I agree there. It's to me, the way I visualize it is it's a long-term investment with huge tax benefits as well. And I think retirement now to us millennials looks very different to what it did to previous generations. There's a lot of retirement goals and a lot more activity for us now. So the income is required now more than ever in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So, Killian, how did you start your pension?
I think my pensions originally started with a conversation in a canteen in work, and of course the older guys talking about pensions every day, all the time, and they got very caught up in the defined benefit. And in those days, you know, you had to work your 40 years and you got 2/3 your salary. But by the time I got around to it, it was a defined contribution scheme, which I suppose, put the onus on us really to start contributing. So I started it by ticking the box. I ticked the box that gave me the minimal amount of entry into it. I think it was 2% of my salary. And then I realized my employer was giving me 2% as well. After some time, it was 4% and 4%. So I started by literally taking a box on a form, obviously being influenced by older colleagues and outlining how great it was to get involved and avoiding that 50% tax. I suppose I am fortunate in working in financial services. I was aware of it, and it was part of the conversation daily, maybe not, maybe, but certainly weekly, and it was quite regular. And you started reading up and getting interested. So I was aware of the benefits of a pension as a long-term play, and very glad I've ticked that box right now, because it's grown and grown and grown since my first contribution.
Yeah, and yourself, Michael, did you have the same benefit of an organisation where you ticked a box, or was it something you pursued yourself?
Yeah, so it was actually something that I had to pursue myself because I'm self-employed. So I actually met with a financial advisor, and it was interesting because at the time I knew nothing about the various funds that I should be investing in and so on. So I ended up being put on quite a conservative fund. This was back in 2017. And I eventually did some research myself and realized, well, hang on, I really should be in index funds and have 100% allocation in equities, given that I was only in my 30s at this stage. I can afford to take risks. So about 6 months later, I changed that, and I'm extremely grateful that I did. So that would be advice I would give to anybody is do go in with a little bit of understanding of how the various funds work, because when we're in our 30s and 20s, we want to be as we want to take on as much risk as we can at this stage, because we can afford a long run game for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're considering that we have 30, 40 years until we need to withdraw that money, we can definitely afford to take a risk and earn those higher returns. And there's always time later and flexibility later. When you need that money, you can go to a more secure fund at that time. So it's definitely worthwhile taking the risk now, because we do have a long way to go until we are going to need that money. Speaking of needing the money, I know there's different ages that we can access pensions. And Killian, I know you were fortunate enough to be able to access a pension from age 50. So there are different ages. So if you have left a company, and we do have another chat around this, when you leave your job, you might have the option from your employer to move funds into your own personal retirement bond. So there are stages in your life where you could actually access pension funds from as early as 50. Majority of the time it's 60. If you are lucky enough to have that option from 50, it's a useful box to tick when you have started that job and realize when you leave in the future you could access those funds. So that's an option that came to you, Killian. You got to move funds into a personal retirement bond and have that flexibility. Do you want to share that experience with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it was from a previous employer. They offered me a buyout bond from my previous pension contributions. So I've started my pension. It's definitely been more than 13 years ago, and I'm within 13 years of accessing it now. So the way I look at it is, I've more than halfway done. So in terms of my accessing my final my pension pot, if that's what I want to do. So yeah, it's so I started my pension with my previous employer. When I left that a couple of years later, they wrote out and offered me to buy out of their pension liabilities. So what they generally do would offer more than what they were going to pay in the future. They would give you a percentage more than what you would use. So yeah, I grasped that, and it's given me further options in terms of what I can invest and take greater control in that now. So I've gone 100% equities on my previous employer's buyout bond, and then also my existing employer's pensions. So I think the biggest risk is not investing in pensions or investing in equities and global equities, spreading your risk across thousands of companies. So over a time span of 10, 15, 20 years, that's the biggest risk, I think, in not doing it really. So it's been it's been great to have that control in my previous pension for my previous employer and also for my existing. So that's been super.
Yeah, of course. And like you have been in a fortunate position there where your employer has made those pension options available to you. But for everybody else, Michael, I'm sure you know it's not a extremely complex process. There is help out there. You can approach a financial advisor and get the direction you need. You can start with small contributions, see how it's fitting with your your finances, and increase them, pause them if things aren't going too well, restart them. It's so flexible, and I think maybe a bit of fear or the unknown is what holds a lot of people back from starting themselves. Would you say that, Michael?
Yeah, there's probably two elements that I would hear the most. So certainly, exactly as you said, Lani, like getting it on automatically coming out of your account every month is probably the first thing and the easiest thing. So you, after a while, as I said at the start, it felt like an expense, but then after a while, you don't even notice it. It goes out like any other tax would, if you like. So it's paid out before you even have access to it, and that's the way it is, which is great. And yeah, you don't even notice it. And because it's taken out regularly, you're then averaging into the market. So the second thing that I would typically hear is, oh, but should I be investing when the share market's so high? And the answer to that is it actually doesn't matter, because you're going to be averaging in over a long period of time. But secondly, it's actually in our best interest at this stage for the market to crash. So for example, last March, when the share market crashed due to COVID-19, I actually increased my contributions at that point because I realized that I could actually buy more units, if you like, for a discount. And that's actually been, in the long run, it's going to pay extreme dividends. So we shouldn't fear market crashes. We should actually be looking for them and encouraging them at this stage during our accumulation years, because it's going to mean that we're going to get more units. But the other side of it is, it doesn't matter. Like ideally, if we don't even look at it, that's probably the best way to approach it. And I try not to actually look at my pension amounts too much unless I know that the share market's doing really well, and then I feel really good about it. But if it drops or there's a dip, then I just carry on as normal and don't worry too much about it.
Yeah, because we've so much time to go, so it's really not worthwhile worrying about it. Sure, it's not.
Well, exactly.
Absolutely not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just in speaking about the time factor, just how much of a factor is compounding in your pension? I know, Michael, we had spoken a little bit on that previously.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's massive. And you've only got to go and key some figures into a compounding interest calculator, and you see. I mean, Albert Einstein supposedly said that compounding interest was the eighth wonder of the world, and he's right when you start to look at it. And Killian, I know that actually talking to you that you've had some great success in your pension over the last 12 months just from the gain, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And look, I find it very difficult at the moment to not look at my pension values, because I've got about 40% of my pension in a tech stock equity fund, and it's absolutely flying. But I mean, I can't access that, whether I look at it or not. I can't access that fund for another 13 years. So it doesn't do me. It doesn't change anything really. I can't access it, can't draw it down. So it's just, I suppose, a feel-good factor really. The effect of compounding is absolutely spectacular. And even when you, like in the likes of a buyout bond, when you can't make further contributions to it, and watching it grow, it's and accepting it's a long-term play. Like that's the beauty of it. Because whether I check it or not, it's just going to do its own thing. And I've selected the sector it's invested in, and life is simple from there on in. Like there's nothing else for me to do. So yeah, it's been a big hit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And because of the time, kind of, you have to go there. There's so much room for compounding as well.
Yeah, and I think with the additional monthly contributions, then you get this amazing spiraling effect of having both, more capital going in plus that compounding effect. And you don't initially see that compounding effect. It does take a couple of years before you start to see it. But once you get a substantial pot in there, then you really start to appreciate it then, and you can see the power. And the great thing is that the more we put in when we're young, the less we're going to have to put in when we're older, because the compounding starts to kick in. And there is a point of time where our contributions will be less than the actual money being earned from the capital growth of the fund, and that's of the pension, and that's when things really get exciting at that point.
Yeah, of course, and that is a big factor. That's an important point, is that the earlier we start, it is important. If we leave it, if we start much later, there are benefits in terms of tax relief. So you'll get tax relief on the contributions that you make. So Killian mentioned receiving tax relief around the, if you're on the higher tax bracket, you'll get tax relief of your 40% or upwards. But if you are investing in your pension later on, those contributions do need to be much bigger to achieve those retirement goals. Whereas if you start kind of now, or you have started in your 20s or 30s, you do have plenty of time for that money to compound. So, and you won't have to kind of kill yourself making huge contributions.
Yeah, exactly. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Vani, with the last point too. Like when you actually, when we start to look at this from a big picture point of view, and we realize that, look, if we want to get us a big pension pot, that the longer that we have to do it, the contributions are a lot less than if we were to start later, when the contributions really are sizably bigger. So again, a simple compounding interest calculator will show that pretty clearly. But it is manageable for us. There's a lot of talk with millennials that it's going to be hard for us, but when you look at it in a compounding interest calculator, even 500 euros a month into a pension is going to be pretty sizable in 30 years' time. So it's certainly something that everybody can consider for sure.
Great. So I know we've touched on a few bits of advice for anybody listening. Is there any advice that we could add for the people listening to us?
Yeah, from my tuppence worth in terms of advice would be to get started, even if it's the minimum amount, even if it's 1%, 2%, and you won't even notice it. When the tax comes off it, you contribute 100 euros a month, it'll cost you 60. And then you might get an employer match, and it might go to, say that 4 or 5% could go to 200 euros a month. All of a sudden, the next thing you have a few thousand, and after a few years of market growth, invested in equities, it just grows and grows and grows. So it's what I would say is get started at whatever you can afford, and notch it up, incrementally in 1 or 2% steps, and before you know it, you'll be at 6 figures. It's a phenomenal growing machine, and my experience has been very, very positive. So yeah, my little tuppence word would be to just get started.
Yeah, I agree.
That's really it.
Yeah, and once you make that step and you get started, you take an interest, and that's when you feel more interest or more committed to contribute more.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm definitely there with Killian, and I think that's great advice as well. So just start, even if it's a couple hundred euros a month, and then maybe as a habit, when you get a pay increase or you get more income coming through, then that's when you can afford to increase the amount that you're putting through, knowing that by the time that you've taken the tax into account, saving 40 to 50% worth of tax is significant. We all complain in this country about paying too much tax. So when there's a tool at our disposal to change that, we should take advantage of it. The second point that I mentioned earlier, just about the funds. So do a little bit of research, and Killian and I have both learnt that index funds and equity seem to work great. The fees are generally far lower than a managed fund. So, do a little bit of research from that point of view to kind of be able to guide your financial advisor a little bit to say, look, this is where I'd like to go. And then thirdly, just keep an eye on the fees that are charged through the pension. So there are different pension providers, and they do charge different fees. The fees will have a factor on the compounding. So just keep that in mind, and just make sure that you're getting the best deal that you can find.
Yeah, exactly. Shop around and make sure that you're getting the lowest cost fees, and the pension how you want it run, as well as the funds. There's such a wide range of funds available, from cost effective index funds to if you have kind of ethical or ESG interests that you're passionate about, those funds are available too. So do consider your funds, express your interest to your financial advisor, and you can achieve a strategy for your retirement together. And then just one more thing, I suppose, that we haven't talked about in terms of tax benefits is that when you do retire, a big portion of that money can be received tax-free. So it's 25%, or sometimes can be more, dependent on whether your money has come from an employer pension. So that's another thing to consider, is that when you reach pensionable age, you can get a big pot of your money tax-free, and the rest of the money, there are tax benefits to that too. So that's another big factor to putting your money into a pension, rather than maybe just putting it under the mattress, the old Irish way.
Hugely. And for me, Blarney, that's when we get to pay the mortgages off then, so that's we'll be mortgage free once at pension age, because that's where that 25% will be going to clear off that mortgage. So it's a great way to kind of kill two birds with one stone, so to speak.
Absolutely. So I think that sums it up for us today.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Blarney.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Cillian. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Blarney.
Please head over to pensionsawarenessweek.ie. I'm Michael Houghton. This has been Pensions for Millennials, and thank you for your time today.